deep suffering, it'll kind of either transfigure you or disfigure you, you know? I have all the empathy in the world for the people it disfigures because I understand the power of trauma and the ways that can twist us in ways we didn't want to be twisted. But even those people, I think they'd say they'd hope there's a way to be transformed or to be transfigured by that experience. And that's what I long for people.
This is Down to Earth Conversations, where we hear from ordinary people who are helping to bring a bit of heaven down to earth. Kia ora, welcome to another episode of Down to Earth Conversations with me, your host, Andy Dixon. Thanks for joining me again today, and thanks for all of you who have fed back on how much you appreciated the last episode with Puna, talking about parihaka. If you found it informative or even moving, why not share it with someone else who may also find it engaging? Today I have the pleasure of talking to Scottie Reeve. Scottie is the author of the book 21 Elephants and co-hosts the podcast of the same name with the Reverend Spanky Moore, who featured all the way back on episode 12. Scottie is passionate about living in community with others, about caring for those who are neglected or even cast aside by society, and about how the church can make a real difference in the world. We talk about his time working for the youth organisation Zeal, the intentional communities he has lived in, including how they held him in both the great times and the very painful times. And we talk about his role as an Anglican church leader and how he is involved in doing church differently in the Wellington suburb of Brooklyn. It's a powerful and very vulnerable conversation. This is episode 61 of Down to Earth Conversations. Here's Scottie Reeve. Scottie Reeve, welcome to the podcast.
Kia ora, Andy. It's cool to finally be here after, long time listener, first time caller.
Yeah.
Cool to be here.
Yeah, nice. For those who don't know you, nor here koe, who are you? Tell us a bit about yourself.
Tēnā koutou, tēnā koe, ngā mihi nui kia koe. It's cool to be here. What do I do? So I am, in order of priority, I'm a dad of a little girl who's almost 2 called Luna, and she's delightful. She went to the Wiggles yesterday.
Oh, nice.
And was particularly taken by Wags the dog. So she's kind of my main deal. Aside from that, I live in a community in Brooklyn, which is about 10 minutes walk out of central Wellington. There's 6 of us who live in a community here, and we're replanting the Anglican church here that was actually the church that my grandparents met in, were buried in. Then alongside that, I have a role in the Anglican diocese here in Wellington, overseeing church planting and pioneer expressions.
Yeah, cool. Man, I remember going to the Wiggles. We got some tickets through a friend, and they just drove me so nuts at home that I was expecting to hate it. But actually, I was really impressed. Like, it was such a good concert.
You were swept up in it.
Yeah. I mean, when you think about the fact that, you go to a normal concert and they might play a 5-minute song and then may or may not interact with the crowd before starting the next song.
Yes.
Whereas these guys are doing 30-second songs and then talking to the crowd and keeping them engaged for an hour while dancing and playing their own instruments. And, I was just like, wow, this is legit. I never want to hear another Wiggles song in my life, but this is amazing.
They're talented people. I mean, I didn't get to go. Her mum took her along, and apparently she was a little bit reticent to begin with, not sure. But then she's obsessed with dogs. So when Wags came out, it was all on.
Nice.
And then at the end of the gig, she ran down to the stage and was spinning in circles. And then they left, and she cried for half an hour.
Oh, so, wow.
They won her over, They won her over.
Nice. Cool. So I've sort of seen you around. This is the first time we've actually met, but I know people who know you, and I've seen your name about, and it's really evident that you're passionate about justice, in a range of different ways, and particularly when it comes to those who are on the outer in society, those who are being pushed to the margins. Was that always part of life for you, or was there kind of a moment where you were turned towards that? What brought that to your attention?
Yeah, so bit of backstory. I went to church as a little kid with my mum, and when I was about 8 or 9, she said, "You can keep going or you can stop going." And I said, "I'll stop going, thank you very much. It's boring." Then a few years later, at about 13 or 14, I came to faith in an Anglican church, but that had some very charismatic Pentecostal youth leaders who took me along to conferences, and I had my kind of first tangible experience of the Holy Spirit, which was amazing. So there's an element to me where I'm never not a Pentecostal, you know, that's kind of, those are my spiritual roots. And interestingly, for those of us who kind of, love to crap on the Pentecostals, kind of you look around for anyone who's doing anything, most of them were Pentecostal at one stage, And so then I grew up in this youth group and through my teen years, but somewhere towards 16 or 17, I started, I think, to become aware that what the church said it was and what it actually was were quite different things. I looked a little while ago. I used to have this terrible Christian high school band who were like a Rage Against the Machine kind of knockoff. I was looking over some of the lyrics, which were like when I was 16, and it was talking about the consumer vultures in the church, and I was kind of seeing at 16 or 17, just seeing how co-opted we'd been by kind of, I wouldn't have used these words, but this kind of neoliberal idea of Christianity, and I remember hearing phrases at the time like challenging phrases where people would say, this is an Eastern religion, right? Not a Western religion. And I'm like, what? Yeah. And then I went to uni and I studied English literature and media, and I did a post-colonial literature paper and started to kind of actually realise that colonisation was a thing. Yeah. This is about kind of 19. And then I realised that the same way I'd been taught to talk about my faith to people on the street with a tract in my hand was oddly similar to what had happened in the story of colonisation. Right. Of Aotearoa, and suddenly it was like, I'm the bad guy. Like, I'm not the good guy. At the same time as this happened, I started volunteering for a youth agency in Wellington called Zeal. And by this point, I was completely done with church. I was like, if I have to sit out another row of chairs, if I have to go to another prayer meeting, if I have to go to another Bible study, I can't do it. And I started volunteering for Zeal. And I remember, though, as a good Pentecostal, I still really craved that tangible, miraculous touch of God. And I would say, as we used to say a lot then, I'm feeling dry. I was feeling dry. And I was volunteering at Zeal one Friday night, and inevitably half our work was running these youth gigs, but the other half was being out on the park out front where there were often kids drinking. And I remember us looking after this one young girl named Jane, and we're pushing white bread into her and water, trying to sober her up. And it's been going on for a while, and then she looks up at me, and she looks in my eyes, and then she lurches back and lurches forward and just vomits over me.
No.
Yeah, but like the crazy thing was that as I kind of sat there in the vomit, I felt a really tangible touch of God's Spirit, and it was a kind of it was a category breaking moment for me. It's like, that thing that I thought needed the band or needed the lights or needed the speaker, it's here in this the bottom of the stairwell with a couple of my friends looking after this drunk girl. Nobody knows we're here doing it, covered in the filth and the muck, and here is the Holy Spirit tangibly present. And that really revived my faith and allowed me to belong in Christian community again, with people who had experienced that similar kind of transformation.
And so you ended up working there, didn't you, at Zeal?
Yeah, so a couple of years later, they offered me a job, and I stayed with at Zeal with a good mate of mine, Brooke Turner, and another good mate, Elliot Taylor, a few different guys, and ended up there for almost 10 years in the end.
From your time with those, like working for those young people, what's something that you wish that the general public knew that might change how we treat them?
It's a really good question. I wonder if I'm thinking of a conversation I had with a counsellor a few years ago. We had from Zeal, we ended up having a few kids come to live with us, and we had a young guy come and join us and have a pretty miraculous experience of coming to faith. And we baptised him on the south coast on a freezing August day, and he started listening to Hillsong, and we all bit our tongues, and just let him listen to Hillsong, and then eventually sort of things went a bit rocky, and he ended up ripping us off and disappearing overnight. And I remember being really, really hurt by that, and not quite knowing what to do with that, and sort of not knowing how to forgive him, not knowing just not knowing where to place that, because I guess in a lot of ways I thought we were living this one story of like beautiful transformation, and then suddenly you discover you're living a different story, or maybe just a part of his story, and I think a lot of my kind of 20s youth work and ministry was very much about the heroic story that Scottie was living, and rather than the story of the people I was serving. So there was a change going on there. But I went and sat down with a counsellor because this really it messed me up a bit for a while, and realising that this in mission and ministry was going to be something that would happen over and over again in my life. The counsellor said to me, "Oh, what would it look like to imagine a story for why he did that?" And I was like, "Oh, that's interesting." And so I started to think, I'm like, well, maybe he was in debt to a bunch of people who were way scarier than we were, and we didn't know about that. But maybe he knew that we were the ones that wouldn't kick the shit out of him. Yeah. So it was easier to take from us than it was not to pay those guys back, Or maybe he had never started to feel so good about himself, but it felt scary to feel good about himself, and he self-sabotaged the relationships he had before he felt we could kick him out. Who knows? And I won't even know his story, but that kind of imaginative process was really helpful for me to cultivate empathy for this person. And that's kind of a practice I've tried to do for years since, is when there's situations of hurt, when you're on the end of some pretty heinous things happening to you, or seeing people go self-destructive, to imagine what might be the empathetic reasons that they might be like that. So it's a long way of answering your question of what do I wish that the New Zealand public or Aotearoa public knew about young people. It's probably the same thing I wish they knew about everybody, is that we could kind of turn on that empathetic imagination to try and trick ourselves into believing the best in people. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I totally get that. I spent some time working with guys who had come out of prison, and I was working with one day, and he got pretty worked up. We were unloading a shipping container, and the customer, we'd turned up to do it, and our customer didn't like his customer, and so it was like, we'll just put it on those rubbish pallets over there. And the guy I was working with took offence at that, like it was a personal thing about him, like he's giving us the rubbish pallets because I'm rubbish, and he got all worked up about it, which to me made no sense at all. But obviously there was a story there, and he got so worked up he ended up asking me if I wanted to fight. Which I politely declined, and then he stormed off, and we had kind of a meeting with me and him and his social worker, and in the prep for it, his social worker was like, "Wow, that is so amazing that he asked you for a fight, but then didn't follow through on that. That is such amazing progress." Yeah. Which, to me, I was just like, "Oh my gosh, he asked me for a fight," But the social worker can see the whole story and goes, actually, this guy's making some massive improvements, and if we just look at the things on surface value, so often we're wrong about, what's driven someone to do it, or, why people
Absolutely.
behave different ways, or, that we take things personally when actually it's got nothing to do with us. It's everything to do with how they were raised, or, trauma that's happened to them, or all that kind of stuff. So.
Oh, and we do the same, eh? Like we flip out, and it's irrational and it makes no sense, and we would want that same kind of grace. When I moved up here to Brooklyn, one of the first things I did to get to know the local neighbourhood is I noticed that the dairy across the road from me, the guy who runs that hosts a whiskey night every Wednesday and Friday evening, just around the counter of the dairy.
Nice.
So it's about between 4 and 6 guys, all in their kind of between 60s and 80s. I kind of managed to push my way in as the 36-year-old priest. And it's actually, man, it's been so good for me as someone who lived on Cuba Street and kind of hyper-liberal, kind of PC Wellington. Like, I've never hung out with a group of such racist, sexist, homophobic people in my life.
Yeah, right.
And I'm not saying those attitudes are okay, and I often find, gentle ways of challenging those attitudes and saying things like, "Oh, I hope my daughter never gets talked to like that," and things like that. But right at the moment there was a ram raid next door to the dairy a few days ago, and so these guys are all, listening to News Talk ZB, and they're all racked up about how Jacinda's not doing enough on crime at the moment. I've kind of been doing the same little gentle process with them as we drink a whiskey of let's imagine what might be the reasons that someone might commit a crime like that. Like, we know that around here at the moment there's a lot of young prospects wanting to get patched, so we're seeing a lot of dumb crimes happen. We're seeing a lot of, like this ram raid, they only took 6 bottles of liquor from the liquor store, so it's not about money. And there's a lot of that kind of prospecting kind of crime going on at the moment, and asking them, well, what do you think, what kind of world is someone living in that they think a gang is the best possible adventure they could be living with their lives? And could we cultivate some, I kind of like that phrase, what is it? It's an explanation, it's not an excuse. And I think sometimes it's just helpful to go, that behaviour is inexcusable, but there's an explanation for how people get there.
Yeah. You referred to your intentional community kind of living. That's something that's been a part of your life for a long time. In a world that's very individualistic, that's fairly countercultural. Can you describe a bit of what that means in terms of the way that you live with a community, and why has that been something that you've bought into?
Yeah, so I've been living in community for probably about 15 or 16 years now, and that's looked different at different times with different levels of intentionality, but probably some of the key threads of that we would say would be mission, hospitality, and prayer, would be the things we all commit to. So in my current community, that looks like Monday to Friday, 7 a.m, we're downstairs in our chapel praying together, and that happens. That happens every morning, and gradually we're starting to get people from the local neighbourhood join in on that too, which is really special. And that's our way of starting the day together with Jesus. And it's really, it's become a really, really powerful part of our rhythm, and I've had a rhythm like that for about 10 years now. I think the other great thing about a prayer rhythm like that is there are times in your life where you just don't want to pray. And sometimes there are times where you're so hurt or so beaten up that you don't have the words, and to have a community of people you daily pray with to carry you to the feet of Jesus, kind of like the paralytic who's dropped in through the roof. Some mornings I turn up at prayer and it really is my friends lowering me in through the roof. But other days I'm lowering them in through the roof. So that rhythm of prayer has been, an absolute lifeline to me over the last decade. And then we have rhythms that we roll together during the week. So every Monday night we get together and as just the crew live in the house, and we explore what's going on for each other, and we pray for each other and ask where God might be in the midst of each of those things. And we also, do sometimes some house disputes of like the dishes didn't get done, it's the whole mess. And then at least once a week we'll also have a crew of people around for dinner that we're meeting in the neighbourhood. So I guess it's a lot of it's about putting things in your life that you don't want to have to make the decision on. You put these rhythms in, so I know that when I'm 70, I want to be someone who has just lived a generous life, and I want to be someone who's deep in prayer, and I want to be someone with deep relationships with other people, and I'm not all of that yet, but if I have these moments in my week where I don't have to decide if I'm going to be that, I become that in time. So it really is about, it's about formation, us growing together, but also, as Jesus said, they will know you by the love you have for one another. So that as we grow in depth together and knowing one another and in knowing God, that actually our community is drawn to the warmth of that.
And obviously for a long time you were single. Now you're married with a kid. How has that changed the deal for you?
Yeah, well, this is I guess another kind of a thing that speaks to community, because one of the incredibly, or the hardest season of my life is just as our child arrived, my wife actually left, and while we were in community, and for anyone who's been through something like that, it's just the most brutal, most awful stuff you'll ever go through in your life. And there is every reason to be the very worst of yourself. There is every reason to run from God. There is every reason, every coping mechanism you could imagine you want to indulge in just to get through what you're going through. But to be with a community of people who keep carrying you to the feet of Jesus and who keep calling out in you who they know you are and who you're going to want to be at the end of that grieving and that healing process, is such a gift. I think one of the great sadnesses I think that I see at the moment is so many of us are so anxious, so tired, so worn out. And our response to that is to go and get some me time. And there's a degree to which, people have different personalities, more introverted, more extroverted. But actually, like, connection is so key. Like, not hiding in those moments is so key. The great awfulness of being in Christian leadership when you go through something like I went through is that you have to ring 70 or 80 people and tell them all. But then the great beauty of that is that you have 70 or 80 people who want to know. And so it is the two sides of that, that deep community. Sometimes it rips your heart out because everybody's seeing it. But then at the same time, like, you do not have to suffer alone. People can carry you to the feet of Jesus, and they can have the faith you can't have. And I guess that's the beauty, we kind of talk about, it's an individualistic culture, and, those of us who live into residential communities, we lean against that kind of consumer individualism and live this different way. And we commit to that because we believe it's better than what's on offer. But what we sometimes don't talk about is that it's actually better for us too. I don't know who I would have become had I just been sitting alone at home with my pain. But oddly, in the context of community and people helping me to walk close with God and to see that God didn't want any of this to happen, God's actually is more gutted than I am. Through that, like, I can actually look back and go, oh, this journey actually transformed me, in a way it couldn't have without the beauty of community constantly pointing to the goodness of God. I don't want to paint the picture that I don't want to get into the toxic positivity thing, but at the same time, I do feel that maybe for some of us in our overcompensation from kind of toxic positivity, have actually forgotten how good the good news of Jesus is and how powerful that hope can actually be to the worst day of your life. That actually, man, God is actually really faithful, and I wouldn't have said that every day of the journey, but the sort of testimony of my life in this season has been that passage from John 1, that the light shines in the darkness and the darkness has not overcome it. And actually there is a way for us to walk through the most profound suffering. And I speak as someone who's had depression and anxiety and, had some of those other real struggles where I've looked at those toxic positivity narratives. But I do feel that for some of us, we need to do a bit of a recalibration to go, let's be real and authentic, but let's actually acknowledge that the story that Jesus invites us to and the power of the Holy Spirit actually can cause us to be witnesses to hope in the most horrific circumstances. And that is actually such hope to the people in our neighbourhoods when we can go through hell and really feel that pain, but still ultimately believe that the world and its people are good.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's quite different from saying, God's brought this thing on you so that you can learn a lesson, which some people go there. It's saying, actually, this thing happened, but actually through God in you and your community, there's able to be hope and light and goodness, even in the midst of that hard time.
Yeah, and I think that the other thing that really saved me, because a phrase that's gone through my head, is deep suffering. It'll kind of either transfigure you or disfigure you, you know? It's sort of, and I have all the empathy in the world for the people it disfigures, because I understand, the power of trauma and the ways that can twist us in ways we didn't want to be twisted. But even those people, I think they'd say they'd hope there's a way to be transformed or to be transfigured by that experience, and that's what I long for people. Can I tell you a little story from that time? Is that?
Yes, please.
A few months before, or actually about a year before it blew up, I was walking up on a beach, Waikawai Bay in the Coromandel, and it was late at night. I was in my tent, we were camping, and I went down to the beach, and there was just this massive moon out in the sky, just kind of lighting the whole beach and the mountains. It's just gorgeous. And I was walking down the beach, and I really felt the Spirit say, I'm going to teach you how to walk by moonlight. And I went back to my tent, and then this happened for 3 nights. I kind of would be woken and drawn out to the beach, and God would say, I'm going to teach you to walk by moonlight. And I got really frustrated because I know a bunch of really positive people, like my co-worker Rose, and I don't want to walk by moonlight. I want to walk by sunlight. I know some people are they're really fun, and but I forgot about that for a few months, and then as everything was falling apart, it was during lockdown where things started. That first lockdown where things started to go quite bad while we were waiting for our daughter to arrive, and I used to go up to this war memorial that looks down over the harbour, and I was doing a centering meditation, and at the end of it, I was just reminded, I'm going to teach you to walk by moonlight, and I opened my eyes, and there's this massive full moon in the sky, and I thought, wow, that's incredible. I got back home, and every now and then I'll read one of Maya Angelou's biographies, and I opened this new one to read, and the first line in the biography said, don't the moon look lonesome shining through the trees? Don't the moon look lonesome shining through the trees? Don't the moon look lonesome when your baby get up to leave? And I was just like, oh my word. And then the next day we had a scan, and we sent the scan around a few friends. This friend of ours, not a Christian, comes back and she goes, oh my gosh, there's a full moon in your scan. And there's this moon in the corner of the scan, and it was just it really, for me, there'd be these continual things along the way. There was one night where I was driving and I had to pull over and just had a total panic attack, and just not able to deal with what was happening in my life, and I was just crying and trying to breathe on the side of the car, and I looked up and saw the moon, and I just felt this peace roll over me, yeah, and I guess it's it's that there was sort of this realization around that time that you go down to the deepest, darkest places of the earth, and there's a fire, and you go to the farthest reaches of space, and there's a star, and there's no darkness where light has not been hidden.
Yeah.
And in the midst of like what I hope is the darkest season of my life, I hope.
Yeah.
There was God had hidden His light in the darkness, yeah, and so actually the one thing my wife and I could agree on was a name for our girl, and we named her Luna, after the moon, yeah, and so that really is kind of become sort of the testimony of my life over these last 2 or 3 years, is the light shines in the darkness, and the darkness cannot put it out, and yeah, and I think there is a way that we can hold together just the profound gut-wrenching pain of life, alongside not the belief that God's just going to make it all better all of a sudden, but that there is no darkness where there is not God's light hidden for us to reach out for, and to potentially even be transformed in that suffering.
Thanks for sharing vulnerably about that. I think there'll be a lot of people that can relate, and that's something that I've been really big on, is finding the good even when it doesn't look like there is any, and not calling what's bad good, but finding whatever good is there, whether that's just there are people here for me while I'm going through this, or whatever it is. But I imagine as well, you've talked about the love that you've felt from the community, and then the hard times that you've gone through within that space. I imagine that there was some times of lightness and hilarity as well in a space of living together. Is there anything that kind of comes to mind for you when you think about that on your communal living journey?
Yeah, I have a punishingly dark sense of humour, which I think comes from my youth work days, where I think a lot of people in people professions, like social workers, cops, nurses and things, sometimes your humour is just absolutely cooked, and so I think I think it was even in the early days, right from when the marriage broke down, I would be making dark jokes about it that helped me to pass through it, and sometimes enjoying that nobody else knew whether to laugh or not, but it kind of kind of helped me, I mean, there's been hilarious moments and beautiful moments. A lot of the missional community I'd done historically had been discipleship of young people, but where we are now is a very different kind of neighbourhood. So we, have our house here, the 6 of us, and then half the week my daughter's a part of that community too, which is lovely. But we met a lady in her 60s down the road who decided she wanted to be part of missional community too, and I just thought that was so beautiful, as to that she's not thinking about going to bed early and kind of packing it in for her Christian walk. She's like, I still want to be challenged, I still want to grow. So she often comes and joins us for prayer in the mornings, and she'll come and help host people for dinner, and she'll often bring a pudding. And the other week
awesome.
she bought a kind of and she was hilarious. She'd been to the chemist, and there was a 15% discount on all their board games because she got her flu jab, and I don't know if she quite realised what she brought along, but she turns up with basically this version of Cards Against Humanity.
Yeah, awesome.
So but like I love that. I love it when my daughter's in the room, and I love it when her name's Jan. I love it when she's in the room, because I think there's something really powerful about how a society treats its very youngest and its oldest. Not that 60's your oldest, but I'm loving the opportunity to see community flex to bring together groups of people who largely society has segmented off from one another now.
Yeah. You mentioned that you're got a role of archdeacon in the Anglican church, and with that focus on church planting and stuff. Firstly, for those who don't know the lingo, what's an archdeacon?
Oh man, the easiest way to talk about an archdeacon is basically as a regional manager.
Yeah, right.
It's just an old English way. So yeah, you're kind of a department manager for the diocese. So that means I spend a lot of time connecting with people doing expressions of church that don't look like church, and mostly saying to them, me too, I know it's hard, I know it's isolating, I know it's lonely, I know nobody gets it, but let's keep going, let's keep pushing, God's moving.
Yeah, I mean, that connects to, I guess, my next question, which was that you seem like, in your idea of church planting and in your idea of what the church could be, you don't seem very interested in planting another service for people to attend and consume. I guess, what is the hope for the communities that you're involved in, and what could the church look like compared to the let's turn up on a Sunday and go away and have it not have any impact in our lives?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting, a few years ago when I started leading a young adults congregation in Wellington, it was immediately obvious that there was a little bit of culture change needed, and one of the ways that you change culture is by changing language, I think. And so one of the phrases we kind of embedded almost as liturgy into the Sunday service was, we come together here to tell the stories of the week that's gone by. And if tonight's not as good, it's because we didn't live it. And actually that this here is about us sharing what happened on the other 6 days, not about filling you up to do, like it's not. I hate all those metaphors that's like, this is the gas station where you get filled up to go out again, because I think it also says that there's nothing replenishing or life-giving about being in the world or about being Jesus to your neighbour. I can only be replenished by coming to this space that's all about me. And so fundamentally, I think probably the most important things of church for me, and when I say church in that sense, talking about your Sunday service, would be the sharing of the stories, and then would be the gathering around the sacraments of what Jesus has left us to do to remember him. So for me, it would be a service at its simplest would look like us sharing the stories and us breaking bread together and remembering what Christ has done for us. But I'm also passionate. I'm passionate about the local church, I think. Probably 80% of the people who come to our church plant here, if you ask them why they come to our church, they say because it's walking distance from my house. And that's a real relief to me, because I don't have to be the best show in town.
Yeah, cool.
They're here because they'll also see me at the chemist or at the liquor store or at the pub or at the dairy having a whiskey. A lot of themes of alcohol in there, sorry. A true Anglican priest. They're actually here because this is their neighbourhood. And I think in this moment of COVID-19 where people have gone quite a bit more local, as an Anglican minister, I'm quite excited about the Anglican ecclesiology, which has always been about the local geography. And when you're ordained as an Anglican minister, you're not ordained for a congregation, you're ordained for a parish. And a parish has a geography. It's not a group of worshipping people, like you're actually ordained to serve everyone in that neighbourhood, whether they want you to or not. You're here for all of them when they need you, and that, I think, for me, that gets me really excited. And it's interesting. I probably used to get a little bit insecure about some of the bigger flashy things around. Feel a bit competitive with the arises or the different things, and why won't that many people come to my church? But now I know what my bread and butter is, and no one can out-local me, Yeah. I have to do is stay in my neighborhood and love that neighborhood. And that to me is a profound relief as a Christian leader, to just serve well and love my neighborhood well, and to teach our community to do that well. So that also means, I guess, another thing that's a little bit different in the way that we do church, aside from the missional community part of it and all of that, is that we don't try to make an impact anywhere outside our neighborhood. So people do sometimes come to our church. We've probably got about 20% who come from other neighbourhoods, but they know that if we do anything, we're going to serve Brooklyn. We're not going anywhere else. Like, this is who we're here for. So examples of that, we set up an op shop and we just started giving away all the profits to other local community groups. So in the last year and a half, we've given away $15,000 to the local kindergarten and the community garden and the Montessori school, and I guess that's one of my other big convictions around the church is I think if the church is doing its job, the neighbourhood should really miss us if we leave.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of churches have closed over the last couple of decades and nobody really noticed because it had kind of shrunk down to 5 or 10 people. Well, they don't notice until you try to knock down the building,
Yeah.
Yeah. And then all of a sudden, everyone who never came to church feels some bizarre ownership over this building, It's really strange.
Know all about that being down here in Christchurch with the cathedral and everything.
Isn't it so odd? It's like there's no other society you could not belong to and expect to have such a say on what they do with their club rooms, eh? It's just very bizarre.
Yeah.
But it's obviously some kind of root, odd, strange seed of Christendom still left in New Zealand culture where people feel that. But I do feel with what we're doing here in our neighbourhood that if we shut up, people would actually miss us because we make a positive net difference on our community before they come to the service.
Yeah, cool. Yeah, and I like that because it's not about what are some ways we can get people in our church building, which is a lot of what I've experienced over the years is how do we get people along to church, meaning how do we get them along to a Sunday service? Whereas you're talking about being the church to the people that you encounter and the people that are part of your community, that where you're living and making a difference there. And if that leads to more people joining your community, your church community, then great. But if not, you're still loving people and doing what you feel like you need to be doing, which is fantastic. You've been involved in a bunch of social enterprise kind of stuff as well, like either you personally or the communities that you've been part of. Do you want to tell us just a little bit about some of those things? What are some things that have kind of grown out of this idea of supporting people and being local and all of that kind of thing?
Yeah, I mean, I guess to take a couple of steps back from that, we're moving on from a time where the church can expect to be paid for what it does, and where Christian leaders can expect to have a job or a house or a stipend or a pension or anything of those things. So the people who are going to lead the church in post-Christendom are doing it only because they feel called to it, not because it used to be a good career move for some people.
Right.
Well, just an awful thing, but the curiosity I always have is, how do we build sustainability into social good at a base level without necessarily needing philanthropy or needing the tides or whatever to make it happen. So I guess like some of the work I've done around that is back when I was with Zeal, we set up an espresso bar in central Wellington in a shipping container called Stories. And what we basically realised is that young people who were with us for 4 or 5 years in our different programs would do really well until they left and didn't have a job or education, and then they could return straight back to the same kind of behaviours they had before. But if they had a reason to get up in the morning and a reason to believe that they had something to offer, that they had some mastery, then it would really change their lives. We created Stories as a way to bridge young people into employment with us and then get them up to a level where they could then go and work for someone else.
Yeah, cool.
And then again, we've kind of continued in that kind of spirit here in Brooklyn, where we actually sold the old church building, which got knocked down, which as you can imagine, went really well for us. But we bought a corner shop with some apartments above it, and the first thing we did in that shop is we put in a co-working space for local creatives and designers and small business people, because for us, we knew we wanted to meet the community, but we needed a revenue engine because, who knows, like we didn't there was no one in our church. There were 4 of us.
Yeah.
So no one's gonna pay for all of this. No one's gonna pay the rent. So I guess it's kind of with social enterprise, they talk about, double or triple bottom lines, and our kind of double bottom line was we need the money to make it work, but we also want to make connection. And then we set up a little boutique op shop and started doing that. So it's really great because actually the church is a bit bigger now, about 30 people, and people are very generous in how they give to that. But a whole heap of that money actually just ends up going out our doors because we have a really quite a good financial model. Yeah, there's some good kind of business savvy running behind the church that also gives us real good engagement with our neighbourhood and means that we're we don't feel pressure to keep the numbers up at church, to keep the coffers full. We don't have those pressures.
Let's talk 21 Elephants before we have to wrap up. That's the name of your book that you released a number of years ago now, and then subsequently your podcast that you do alongside the Reverend Spanky Moore, who's been a past guest on the podcast as well. What's it got to do with elephants, and why did you write it?
Yeah, well, I'll start with why did I write it? I wrote it as therapy to begin with, really. It was kind of my way of processing the experience of a decade of youth and community work. So I wrote it as, sort of kind of personal therapy, and I don't think I ever thought it would actually be something that would be published. But as I went along, a sort of a second motive came in, and that was that a couple of my family members, my sister in particular, read The Irresistible Revolution by Shane Claiborne. And then she called me up and she's like, Scottie, I understand you now.
Yeah, awesome.
Like my family started to get their head around kind of, that this probably wouldn't be a phase for me. And so I started thinking, maybe I can write a book that helps them to kind of understand. And then I think, as that evolved, I started to think, oh man, this is actually a great way of holding some of the stories that formed our communities, and the kind of the charism of our. Actually, in the words of a friend of mine, Elliot Taylor, who you should definitely interview at some point, he said that book is kind of like the charism of our early 20s. Like it's kind of it explains a lot of how we became who we became. And it summarizes all those late night conversations that people like me and Elliot would have, being angry about the mega church and wanting a more just expression, and all those kind of angsty 20-something questions. And I kind of wanted to write a book too before I was 30, so that I could it wouldn't be tamed by my aging, because it was interesting, even as I was editing it towards the end, there were things I'd written years earlier that I kind of wanted to soften. And I'm like, no, don't soften them, because there's actually a gift of being early 20s and pissed off. And there is something as you get older, where you see the nuance a little bit more. And in some ways that's really good, but in some ways you get more compromised. Yeah, the metaphor around that book, 21 Elephants, is a few years ago I was in New York and I heard this amazing story of the Brooklyn Bridge there, which is, just such a cool bridge to walk over. I've walked it a few times, and basically there was this amazing story of how it was built. That includes this incredible story of the world's first female project engineer, Emily Roebling, and who took over the project when her husband died, and just typical kind of ultra masculine hubris kind of project, and they built this thing, and then nobody believed it was safe, and so no one would use it, so it just stood there and no one would go across it. And then there was a circus ringleader at the time, P.T. Barnum, who some people will know from that The Greatest Showman. I think Hugh Jackman plays him in that.
Yeah.
Anyway, so he comes to town again full of masculine hubris, and he says, I'm going to prove it can stand. And he has these 21 elephants, and one of them's called Jumbo, and he marches them across the bridge. And from that day on, people, for some reason, thought, well, if it can support 21 elephants, because an elephant's the heaviest thing in the world, right? Then we'll use it. And 150 years later, it's still standing. And I guess I sort of borrowed that metaphor for the things in our adult faith that walk across the kind of the structure of our belief and test it and twist it and put weight on it, but actually it feels like your faith is often dying at the time, but actually it's kind of a stress test that forms it into something that we know can actually carry us into the future. Yeah, so... Yeah, no, that was, writing 21 Elephants was a really, really cool journey, and I'm in the middle of another therapy project at the moment that I feel will probably turn into another book eventually.
Nice. I look forward to it. You've then done, was it four seasons of the podcast so far?
Yeah.
You've looked at a whole bunch of different kind of themes. You covered, the first season was looking at the book itself. You've looked at ancient solutions to modern problems, which just fascinated me as someone who hadn't been part of a more traditional church. But yeah, I really responded to that. Artists and Activists was an incredible series. I just found every episode of that just captivating. And then more recently, you've talked to people who had some pretty dramatic conversion stories. Out of all of that, do you have any kind of favorite moments or interviews that kind of really stand out for you?
Probably my favourite episode is the first episode of season 3, Artists and Activists, which is the story of A.D. Leeson and the Waihopai 3, and their tearing down the spy base at Waihopai. It's just such a, you're probably like me, I don't go back and listen to my own stuff or read my own stuff very often, but A.D. is such a gifted storyteller, and Spanky is so gifted in the editing room. And just that episode is just so much fun to listen to just listen to AD spin that yarn. That was really cool. I really enjoyed the opportunity to sit down with Kimbra and have a chat about what propels her art. And that was kind of special because we knew each other when I was at Zeal and when she was a teenager, and just sort of reconnected and found that although we hadn't talked for a long time, we'd been on similar spiritual journeys. So it's nice to find that God has led you on similar journeys. And then in particular, this latest season we're recording is all talking to people who are close to death or have been close to death. So last week was in Auckland and sat with 3 people with those experiences, which our hope for that series is, we know that for many people our age and younger, that we're often wrapped up in our own lives, and often the things we think are important probably aren't that important. And we have a hunch that some of those people facing the end might have a better radar on what really matters. And we're beginning to see that as we ask them, that they're starting to say things like, why did I work so hard? And why did I talk so much? And why didn't I spend more time telling people I love them? It's quite beautiful. I'm enjoying that so far. Yeah,
awesome. Oh, thanks so much for your time, Scottie, and for your vulnerability, for your commitment to serving people and loving them. Thank you for what you're doing to bring a bit of heaven down to earth.
Thanks heaps, Andy, for what you bring too. It's again, it's incredible that you manage to pull one of these out every fortnight. I don't know how you do it. You're a machine.
Awesome.
Hello, hello, heaven. Will I hear you whisper to come near?
I really appreciated Scottie's vulnerability throughout the corridor, and the fact that he just so obviously loves people. And I love that metaphor of walking by moonlight. I've had times in my life when it feels very much like that, and I'm sure some of you do too. Times when it seems like everything has gone dark, so you take whatever light you can get until the sun comes out again someday. Thank you, Scottie, for sharing yourself with us. Here is a blessing for you. Scottie, May you always have an imagination that can see the stories behind the actions, that gives people the benefit of the doubt and can offer love even to those who betray your trust. May your world and your work continue to be upheld by the Jesus you serve and the belief that the world and its people are inherently good. May the church you lead become world famous in Brooklyn as you outlocal all others, sowing aroha and manakitanga and rangimarie into your community. And may the locals of Brooklyn see the hope for a better future that's inherent in all that you do, and know that they can hold on to that hope as well. May your pain be a constant source of empathy for you, filling you with compassion for others who also suffer heartbreak. And may your vulnerability break down walls that others may erect in their own lives as they try to pretend that they are fine, that they aren't hurting and in need of love. May you always have a community to wrap its arms around you when the night is at its darkest, to carry you when you can't go on, and to walk beside you when you can. May the light of the moon always be a sign to you of hope, a sign that you are never alone, that there is always a way to move forward, and that joy and love can find their way to you, even in the darkness. As Luna grows, may she know that she is a light to the world around her, that she's worth more than all the stars, and that she is loved beyond measure. And lastly, may you know you are seen, you are heard, and you are loved. Thanks to Strawn for the music and Rangi for the karakia. Join me next time when we head into our last couple of episodes for the year, continuing to shine a light on kindness, goodness, and love. Until then, me inoi tātou.
E tō mātou matua I te rangi, kia tapu tō ingoa, kia tau mai tō rangatiratanga, kia mea te tau e pai ai ki runga ki te whenua, kia rite anō ki tō te rangi. Homai kia mātou ai nei, he taro mā mātou mō tēnei rā. Muro o mātou hara, me mātou hoki e muru nei I o te hunga, e hara ana kia mātou. Aua hoki mātou e kawea, kia whakawaia, engari whakaorangi a mātou I te kino. Amen.